Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Undiscovered Metric. I'm Mark Debenham, and today I'm delighted to be joined by David Bushell, who is the founder of a marketing agency called AdGrow. AdGrow is a marketing agency that specializes in pay-per-click advertising. David, welcome to the pod. How are you doing today?
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, not too bad. Thanks for having me.
So let's dive right in. So AdGrow, paid media, like tell me, how did you get into the industry? Like what's your journey? What's your story there?
Yeah, I did a marketing degree, which kind of, I guess, pointed me in that direction. And then as soon as I finished that, like everyone, started looking, what am I going to do? Was lucky enough to get a bit of work experience, a bit of training across the field of marketing. Did my CIM, but ultimately ended up working for a company that did a lot of Google ads, and it was this was quite early days. We're talking way back in the early 2000s when Google really was in its infancy, but yeah, and I picked up. I was lucky enough to get trained, got a lot of good in-house experience working, on the client side, and then over time, gradually I started doing more consultancy work as a supplier, and then built up AdGrow from about 2008, and it's just grown organically since then. But it's changed a lot over the years, and it's a fun industry to work in, ever changing, quite combination of creative and data driven. So yeah, that's a very short summary, but here we are.
What was the thing that compelled you to set up AdGrow?
I think it's the measurability of it. I think marketing's obviously become hugely data driven, over the last few decades. I think it's a very, very different skill to what it was, before the internet, before, it's going back a long time now. But, it is, I've always been quite a data guy. Was that sort of person who's quite into fantasy football and looking at the numbers and the stats and the XG and all that kind of stuff. And Google Ads and PPC in general is, it is a great hybrid of data, but with a bit of creativity too. It's not pure spreadsheets, but it helps. So yeah, I was definitely the data, the more mathematical side that kind of attracted me to it, I think, definitely.
And as you mentioned, like obviously you built up that experience by sort of in your formal education and then your workplace experience as well, and then the shift towards starting up your own agency. What I'd love to know more about is like what kind of advertising channels did you used to use, and you, like you mentioned search engine advertising and Google specifically, but could you tell me a little bit about some of the different ones that you'd normally work with clients with both at AdGrow and previously?
Yeah, I mean, obviously Google Ads is the big one, but so I won't kind of focus too much on that. But I mean, outside that, it depends on the type of client, the type of business, but you'll typically see, of course, Meta, LinkedIn ads for more B2B focused. SEO is always there, always has been, always will be, as a key channel. And yeah, I mean, I think, any form of pay-per-click media, is big, and that includes Amazon as well, for retail. That's quite, in my opinion, quite an undeveloped advertising channel, because I think the Amazon platform's not quite as strong as the likes of Google, LinkedIn, Facebook. And then you've got affiliate too. My own personal area is much more on the more traditional PPC, the Google Ads, the Facebook, the LinkedIn. But definitely, I think the world's, ever since the dawn of cost per click advertising, that's probably the biggest change in marketing. To be able to pay per click, because it's a completely different kind of universe to what went before. So, and the maths of that is completely different. So yeah, I think that's all the usual channels, but I think for me, it's important to have a grounding in core marketing principles. I was lucky enough to do my CIM and learn my 4Ps and all the sort of textbook stuff. And when you're learning it, when you're starting out your career and you're learning those things, you sort of think, oh, it's all a bit textbook, it's a bit dry, but I'll learn it anyway. But it is amazing how, as the years go by, you do actually realize that these guys knew what they were talking about. So it's handy to have that background knowledge, I think, when you're doing something quite as operational, and ground level as changing bids or creating a campaign. It definitely helps.
With pay-per-click advertising, like the mind automatically goes to search engine advertising, specifically Google. What I'd really like to pick your brain about is on campaign performance in Google Ads, in search engine advertising there. What are the key metrics that you typically look at when running campaigns for clients?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, the goal of any campaign is, of course, to maximize return, whether that be counted in conversions or revenue in the world of retail. But underneath that, you've got, I guess, some really quite, the real driving the why rather than what. And, when you look at CPA, which is, most people's, one of the key metrics of most people, CPA can be defined by the cost per click and the conversion rate. Those are the two things that create a CPA. There's not really anything else that adds to CPA that those two don't. Those are your levers. Those are your, ultimately, as an advertiser, those are what you're trying to improve and change to make the CPA better. And then you have to look at it a little bit like a tree diagram, where you think, right, okay, we want to increase conversion rate. How do we increase conversion rate? Well, conversion rate is a combination of your targeting. You target the right people, and of course your messaging and your offering. And that's, suddenly you're thinking, okay, 4 Ps again. You're thinking, is the product right, the price right, the promotion right, the place right, and that's your conversion rate. So you're already back to kind of CIM textbook with that. The cost per click side is where you get a little bit more. It's a little bit more. That's where you're getting a bit more stat focus, where the spreadsheets come out, and you're thinking, right, okay, how do we get our cost per click down? And there's lots of ways of doing it, but really it comes down to burn rate and click-through rate and quality score and things like that. These are quite low-level stats now that all play quite a big role in that ultimate CPA goal. If you could double your click-through rate in an ad because you've suddenly discovered this really resonating copy, you've doubled your burn rate effectively. And if you've doubled your burn rate, and just to be clear what burn rate is, it's how fast you're spending your budget per minute, hour, day. If you double the rate at which your daily budget is being used up, then that's a great thing, because that means you can start lowering your bids. You don't need to bid as high anymore to spend the daily budget that you've got. So suddenly click-through rate's given you a really quite big win there. It's not just about having a nice looking ad, it's about burn rate and budget utilization. And if I were going to say there's one kind of really undiscovered metric, it is probably budget utilization. You want to be making sure that your budget is burning in a responsible way as fast as it can, without sacrificing quality. And definitely you want to be looking at that. So, it's definitely about the bidding half of it and the messaging, and the 4 Ps half of it. And I think the 4 Ps half everyone kind of gets, but the bidding half of it, actually, I don't think it's amazing. Even at top level agencies, I think they're not. It's not necessarily something I would say is executed to perfection.
Well, a lot to unpack in that response right there. CPA, to cost per acquisition.
Yeah.
And when you were talking about that, you mentioned around burn rate. So by burn rate, you're talking about extending the budget and the lifetime in a campaign so that it can be at its most efficient and running for the longest. Is that correct interpretation of that?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, whenever I look at a new account or campaign for the first time, probably the first thing I'll look for before I get into the the nitty gritty of what's working, what's not, is the targeting right? What I look for is it spending, okay, are the campaigns spending budget? And if I'm looking to try and find a quick win, and I can see a campaign that's got that big red limited by budget sign next to it, that's got, by definition, 100%, always spends its daily budget. You always see that spend curve just flat because it always nails the budget. And then you look at things like lost impression share budget, which is kind of Google's way of saying, this is how much more you could have spent if you hadn't capped the budget. You know, when you see big numbers in that column, like 50, 90%, that's where as a marketer, you kind of lick your lips and think, right, okay, I've got a nice quick win here. All I've got to do is to start lowering the CPA target because this campaign can take it. It's hitting its budget easily. Why are we bidding this high? We don't need to bid this high. And that's just the quickest win, is getting your burn rate right. Sometimes it's not there. Sometimes the campaign's not spending its budget, in which case you move on. You accept that quick win's not there. But a lot of the time you look at campaigns, you think they're all spending their budget. And the goal of any account, of any campaign, should always be to spend what budget you've got in the most efficient way possible. You know, as an agency, we often get given targets. And of course, you know, we understand the need for that and the stakeholders that all contribute to those targets. But for me, the targets are always the same, which is to maximize return on any budget, and in doing so, create the business case for more budget.
And David, something that you mentioned, and you really hit the nail on the head with this podcast series, was Undiscovered Metric, which you said was budget utilization, and that, am I right in thinking that's what you're talking about when you're saying that, you know, are you maximizing the burn rate of that campaign? Are you keeping it going and setting everything up to actually gradually lower that cost per acquisition amount? I'm just sort of wondering when coming up with that cost per acquisition margin, how do you come up with that margin for a new campaign?
That's a real collaboration. Just to be clear on the definition of budget utilization, because I appreciate it's a bit jargony. And Google reps talk about budget utilization. You know, when you have calls with the reps, they'll talk about this. But you know, you're looking at over a rolling 7-day period. What's your current daily budget times 7, aka your current weekly budget, and what's your actual spend over the last 7 days as a percentage of your current weekly budget? That's what budget utilization is. So it's a rolling. You have to look at over 7 days because Google does. You know, you get weekly seasonality. Google will start rolling spend over from day to day. But if you do it over a 7-day window, you'll get a relatively good reading on that. But yeah, how do you define margin or CPA or ROAS target? I mean, it obviously comes down to what the margin of the service or the product that you're selling is. You know, a typical retailer, for instance, might have a 35-40% margin. You know, so you know that's a gross margin. Sorry. So you know, when you look at that, you're thinking, right, okay, what ROAS target would we set for that kind of margin? And I would say a typical retailer is going to be somewhere between, well, upwards of 500% ROAS. That's probably as low as you can go. Even that's kind of pretty break even. But on a sort of typical 35% margin, you might be at 700% ROAS. Some people will be a lot higher than that. We've got clients who want you know, a 5% cost versus revenue kind of relationship, which is a 2000% ROAS. That's pretty tough order. But it does come down to what the gross margin of the product or service is. And of course, any other strategic, you know, wins that you might get, like lifetime values, of course, quite key. You know, the whole lifetime value is again where you're getting a bit deeper into the maths, and it's harder to calculate that. But the reason you do is because you're trying to find more margin. Ultimately, you're trying to say, look, it's not just about the first sale. This customer's going to come back. This customer's going to stay subscribed. And it's that allows you to say, okay, well, we can afford a higher CPA because the lifetime value is there. And if you can afford a higher CPA, you can afford to spend more, to grow more, to build your business more. So I think, you know, you're looking at gross margin, your lifetime value, ultimately, to try and define your CPA and your ROAS, definitely.
Can you share any stories about any like successful or successful ones where you've had a great return, a great ROAS, a great return on ad spend, or one where you learned a lot that you'd like to talk about today?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely one example that client we work with currently, you know, who I won't name, but it was a very interesting journey we've been on, especially last year, because they're a retail client. They sell a mixture of women's clothing, some of it quite formal, some of it more casual. But we came in and we could see that a lot of their sales came from products with really high return rates. And that's the stat I haven't, I guess, mentioned yet, is return rate. It's all very well saying, oh, great, it's got a great margin. But in clothing retail, which is probably one of the hardest verticals, to be completely honest, you've got return rate. And we ended up in this slightly unique scenario where we'd gone in and we'd actually lowered that client's revenue, but increased their bottom line. Because what they'd done prior to that was pretty kind of textbook Google Ads. They just followed the revenue, but the revenue was on products that had high return rate. So that underneath that, there was a real sting in the tail. So we ended up really setting much higher ROAS targets for those high returning brands and categories, which made sense, that were calculated. And of course, the higher ROAS target meant that the volume pulled back a bit, but that's fine. Suddenly now we kind of, because it's high ROAS, the return rate's not such a problem. We kind of got the insurance against that return rate by being so profitable at the front end of the process. And then indeed, we went more aggressively. We lowered our ROAS. We were much more aggressive and spent more, bit higher on products that were lower margin, but ultimately had much lower return rate. So their real margin was actually much better, but it was hidden by return rate. So certainly when you get into the realm of clothing, you have got a whole load of extra factors like that. Stock is the other one. That's always coming in and out of stock. And really what you want is a true picture of margin. You want consistent data. You don't want things that are going on and off all the time, in and out of stock, because bid algorithms don't like that too much. But yeah, that was, as a sort of case study, I thought that was really eye-opening, to go into a client and lower their revenue, but end up with a really happy client. There's a first time for everything, but it did make sense, and yeah, we were quite pleased with that, because we went far beyond the Google Ads data. We went into their data, and that's where the real magic was.
So we're sort of moving from beyond the campaign performance to actually what's happening end to end, from the business point of view.
Yeah.
So it seems as though it's kind of like you mentioned before around always being drawn in by the data, that it's really a case of you can't look at campaign data, or you can't look at paid media data in isolation. It really inevitably goes into the business metrics as well, or like department-wide metrics and business-wide metrics as well, especially for like, say, e-commerce.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, and for lead gen, you have a similar dynamic with, the classic textbook sort of scenarios that you do a lead generation campaign, you get tons of leads, but the sales team comes back and says, well, they're all kind of rubbish leads. And lots of people use platforms like HubSpot and other CRMs to, of course, track a lead down the funnel and really understand quality. It's really, really important to connect your offline data with your online data. In other words, import your MQLs, your SQLs, your customers back into your platforms like Google Analytics or Google Ads or LinkedIn or Meta, to see not just your CPA, your cost per sort of unqualified lead, but your CPA for an SQL, and really see, are we generating quality? Can we quantify where that quality is coming from? So, connecting data sources, is one thing, just being good at, running one of these advertising platforms, but the real magic you tend to find is in the client side and the internal data in the CRM. And certainly the big kind of continuous change that I've seen since doing this job since, the early 2000s, when none of this existed, is that, my job's gone from being that guy who opens up the bonnet and starts fiddling around and goes, look at what I've done, to someone who sees that part of the job a lot more automated. There's a lot less scope for differentiation, I think, in bid management. Google Smart Bidding's taken a lot of that away. Even some of the campaign types a lot more automated, like Performance Max. But what is still there, and what's even more there, I would say, is it's taking the insights from the account and also connecting data sources to really join the dots. And if you can do that effectively, and it just so happens that AdVerity is very good at doing that. But if you can connect your data well, you'll get more findings, and you'll get more competitive advantage. So yeah, whether it's return rate, whether it's understanding SQLs, whether it's to understand lifetime value, it's the real money is really after the conversion, and that's what needs to be measured.
You mentioned about technology and how that's changed the landscape of advertising, and you hit upon it a little bit there as well in terms of like when you were first starting out in the industry, you know, how your role was and now how it's changed. Could you just tell me a little bit more about that? Like
Yeah.
how it's impacted not just reporting but optimization as well.
Yeah, I mean, if you rewind the clock, you know, maybe even 10 years, maybe a little bit more, you'd have I guess the biggest change is bidding and keywords and targeting. So like bidding used to be manual, or you get third-party platforms that would kind of automate it. But you ultimately, a Google Ads account would need bid adjustments set for mobile, desktop, tablet. It would need all sorts of other bid adjustments on things like audiences, or you know, you'd have keyword level bids, different bid for each keyword. Some of those things still exist. You can still change the CPA target for device and stuff like that, but there was a lot of moving parts there. And you know, you'd have bid platforms that would charge a percentage of spend to kind of supercharge that process. And then Google came along and said, no, we know we've now launched smart bidding on the platform, where you just put in a CPA target, and then we'll use all our bid signals, like the device, the time of day, demographic data it's got about age, gender, search history. You know, we use all that to do an on-the-fly bid for every single search to work out, is this person someone we should really go for, or not so much, you know. So I mean, that's a big change. That took actually quite a lot of workload off the agency, because Google's kind of taken that. It does do a good job of it, and you know, there are still third-party bidding platforms out there, but by and large, it is done within the platform now, within Google Ads, and likewise for you know for you know, Bing Ads, Microsoft Ads, and LinkedIn and Facebook, it's all the same. And then you've got again, the keyword targeting size changed a lot. You know, you used to get these tools that would generate all the misspellings and the plurals of your keyword list. You'd have to really go. You'd have these long spreadsheets. It was painful. I remember sitting with clients, and it was just everyone just bored out of their mind, because there's long reams of the same thing, just listed in a million different ways. And that, you know, that was the thing. You'd have to be on that. That was how you got competitive advantage, by targeting a plural that someone else might not have spotted. But again, now it's you know, keyword targeting is a lot. It's much more theme based, should we say. Google have progressively kind of eroded the definitions of their match types. You know, I wouldn't say exact match is really an exact match anymore. Phrase match is pretty much what broad match used to be. But all that's kind of changed. There's still a lot of focus on negative keywords. I think that's something that a lot of people like. The funny thing is, the more Google automate, the more competitive advantage you get, because now we get a lot of hate through like negative keyword scripts. So and that gives us the ability to hyper target a theme and overcome Google being a little bit liberal sometimes on what it might show your ad for. Whereas in the old days, you would just bid at what you want to bid, and that would give you that. So it kind of flipped on its head. I think a lot of people just didn't really do negative keywords. I don't think they get the airtime they deserve, negative keywords, but you know, so that's a change. But yeah, it's gone from, I guess, about building something up from scratch on a really blank canvas in a really painstaking way, to Google's going to kind of build a lot of this for you now. But now what you've got to do is make the interventions to stop Google doing it wrong. So the whole kind of skill set was flipped on its head, probably around 2015 maybe, and it did require quite a change in thinking, and that's where data comes into it. That's where scripts come into it. It's like, who can automate better, rather than who can have the most thorough keyword list and bid software, whatever it might be. So yeah, it's changed a lot for sure.
So now the way that you can really get that competitive advantage is by automating better, having more access to data.
Yeah, definitely. I think in the old days, your sort of classic agency audit would come in and sort of somewhat gaslight the client into thinking they were missing out on all these keywords or whatever it might be. Whereas now it's pretty hard to miss the keyword, to be honest, because you give Google a keyword, it will bid on pretty much anything it can, around that keyword, especially if you're using broad match or something like that. So you don't really need to do long keyword lists. But now it's actually the agency audit's going to be more about saying, look at your search queries. Why aren't you negative keywording all this stuff? So it's like the opposite. So it is about, how do you do that at scale? How do you, do you have a script to add negative keywords? What processes have you put in place rather than, look at what you're missing out on, so there's tons of cool scripts out there. It's a big world that people like me kind of live in. And yeah, it's the job of the agency to maximize the automation to get the result for the client. But yeah, it has very much gone from what are you not doing to what are you letting Google do that it shouldn't do.
So for say somebody starting out in the profession, or a company that really wants to ramp up their pay-per-click advertising, specifically in search, what would you say? What would you say is the best way to cut through the noise? Like, would it be to, with so much automation available, smart bidding, performance max, you mentioned as well, so many different metrics there. What would you say would be the best way? Like you mentioned, cost per acquisition cost, budget utilization, burn rate as well. Would they be a combination of those? Would be your undiscovered metric the main things that you would say to focus on? Like, what would you say to anybody listening to this right now?
I guess what I'd say is your target shouldn't be an arbitrary figure. It shouldn't be, we want to grow by 20% because the board wants to grow by 20%. Yeah, I mean, I get that the business has got to have a target, but your target should be to maximize efficiency at the end of the day. And that might be in line with your business target. It might be way over that target. It might be under it, which you got a problem. But you got to look: are we maximizing conversion rate? Do we think? I mean, it's hard to ever answer yes to that. But if you've done a lot of CRO testing, if you've done a lot of work on your landing page and your targeting, then you can at least say, look, we've taken the easy bits at least. So conversion rate, you getting the max? Do you have a process to always try and get more conversion rate? Is the question you should be asking. Is your budget utilization right? Have you got the CPA, that you need to get, and are you utilizing all the internal metrics to calculate that CPA correctly? That's how you grow an account. Of course, doing your A/B testing, your ad copy, your remarketing, your customer map, all these little things that the Google Web will take to do. Yes, that's the lower level stuff, but you got to you got to look: are you utilizing your budget effectively, and do you have a conversion rate optimization process in place? Is probably the two big ones. If you've got that nailed, you're in the right, you're pointing in the right direction.
Like you mentioned about the technology changing the landscape of the industry. What would you say, like, to anyone who really wants to gain that advantage? Like, how can they keep ahead of the curve? How can they stay up to date on industry trends? Like, are there any, like, what do you do, David? Like, are there any blogs that you turn to, resources, podcasts? Like, what would you recommend to keep up with the industry?
I mean, from a hands-on guy, I always want to be up to date with scripts, just because there's just tons of nice shortcuts and cool things in there. It's just a bit of a toy box. But B, it also aligns with how kind of the bleeding edge, the real thought leaders are thinking, because that's the first outcome, is you get a great script. There's some scripts out there that pull apart Performance Max, which is one of these new campaign type that Google's kind of taken a lot of control away from the advertiser. So that, and that gives you a lot of that back. So I definitely always want to know, even if I wasn't the person doing the hands-on optimization, even if I was, on the client side and the marketing manager, the marketing director, I still want to kind of know what's out there. How are those guys thinking? Because that would at least allow me to ask the right questions and look at what can be automated, what can be scaled. So that's definitely one bit. I mean, I think, you've obviously got like some of the key blogs, and there's quite a few of them. Search Engine Journal's one of them. Ginny Marvin, who's on Twitter, Google Ads Liaison, is the other sort of title that she has. Very important to follow her, because she'll be the first to announce changes to the Google Ads platform. Just a nice, easy one, that. But you want to kind of have her on your feed, I think. But yeah, the other one is just talking to people, having a beer, and knowing people in the industry who've tried stuff and succeeded, who failed. I do that. I've got a few people who I've worked with for years and years in the AdGrow team, and some of them outside. And yeah, I'm lucky to have that. But they're always learning, they're always testing, and you'll the amount of knowledge I've got, the amount of money I've made for clients just from having a beer is underrated, I think. So I would definitely, I would definitely not leave that off my list of resources, for sure.
I love that. And yeah, like you learn so much from talking to someone, and that's a great point to end on, because I feel like I've learned so much from just listening to your words here, infinitely more than I could learn scrolling different blogs on my phone and whatnot. So thank you. I've got a
That's
lot.
very kind of you. Thanks, Mark.
Well, many thanks for joining us today, David, and
Not
hope
at
you
all.
enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. You too.